Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a podcast to answer your questions on addiction, recovery, and mental health by Waismann Method Opioid Treatment Specialists and Rapid Detox Center. We've been talking about the subject of overdose, and with some of the issues of fentanyl coming into the United States, and we've got an interesting angle that's also very, very scary and very, very tragic to talk about, that it's also very, very important. There has been such a big uptick in younger people getting involved with this and seeing overdose even amongst kids in middle school. This is traditionally kids age 10 to 14 here in the U.S., and I don't know the age breakdowns or what they call middle school in all other countries, but I know that in the U.S. we've seen a huge increase with kids even that young who are getting into overdose deaths. David Livingston and I are going to be talking about this today. Claire, unfortunately, was not able to join us today, but we're going to be digging into this topic. And right as we were getting ready to record, David and I were just comparing notes. I would say your considerable expertise on social media, David. How did you describe that to me?
My considerable expertise comes from everybody but myself in terms of social media, particularly my kids and family members. But that said, it's all just a form of communication and information. And I know enough to know how things work.
Right.
But I'll leave it at that.
An interesting thing to see how technology will facilitate these things, which it always has ever since the first phone got plugged in. The first phone call was, of course, Alexander Graham Bell or whoever. And then the second one was about people scheduling a drug deal. No, that's not probably true. That's not historically accurate. But, pretty soon things are used for things that people want to use them for. And so people who are trying to spread opiate use or who are trying to sell drugs, they're going to use what's available. And there's quite a bit going on with social media and how that's affecting. Interestingly enough, I just barely had this conversation recently with my kids. Do you know the stuff that's going around? Do you know what fentanyl is, and do you know what this is? And that even if you were going to misbehave, so to speak, even if you were going to do something, there are definitely more dangerous ways to do it, and there are people dying. And having this conversation, which one of the interesting things to find out was that they really hadn't heard people talk about this overdose risk. You don't hear kids talk about that as the way they talk about other risks and things.
That's right. That's exactly right, which is why I would strongly suggest that parents scare their kids. And because fentanyl is being put into all kinds of things, not just opioids, but other substances, like benzodiazepines. I've even heard of it being in marijuana and other things where things are getting laced with it is, I guess, the terminology. And so it's a scarier world, I think, in that regard than it's ever been. When I was growing up, if you, it was a big deal for someone to go out and sort of smoke some pot or something, but it wasn't dangerous. And kids would explore a little bit, and there were still boundaries. But now it's changed. I certainly am, having that discussion with my kids so that they understand it's scary in a way that it did not used to be.
One of the triggers for this conversation that we were looking at was an article that was it's titled "Middle School Children Fall Prey to Fatal Fentanyl Overdoses" by Jen Christensen, and Claire had shared that with us as we're picking topics for this episode. The reason I want to mention the article is because a couple of facts that come out of that take the example of a young man who was age 14 actually came to his parents and said, I need some help. I've been fooling around with pills a little bit. I was curious about them. I started taking them. And then soon after, very soon after, he had told them, I believe it was even within days of telling them, he died. He died of overdose. Another very interesting thing about this case is that he had done what I think a lot of young people now do when they are going to do something. He had actually researched on the internet before messing around with pills or taking any drugs. And he had looked up things like, well, here's how much you can do to avoid becoming dependent. here's, don't do more than this in this amount of time, and you'll be less risk for overdose. And so, I mean, and I'm not certainly trying to endorse the trusting what you find there, but that's a very interesting thing to me, is to say that, young people are used to looking up things and saying, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it right. I'll read the Amazon reviews or whatever, whatever it is. But to say, he was trying to be as safe as possible, but what he didn't know was that a lot of the pills that are available, especially on the street level, are actually fentanyl that is, used in a pill press or whatever. And they said some of the statistics here are that 4 out of 10 of the pills that you might buy on the street, they say 4 out of 10 fake pills made with fentanyl contain a potentially deadly dose. And that's according to the DEA and just the data that they've gotten. So that really only comes from the ones they've recovered, right? What they have access to. There's got to be more out there that they haven't seen.
That's 40% chance. You take something that you might. I didn't know that statistic, but that's and not surprising. I mean, and I'm talking with people who are detoxing and so forth, who've had, some have OD'd and come back. Many have lost friends to it. And so what happens is that the way people talk about it, because stuff is when things, and I think social media has sped this up, where when you're talking and thinking about things, there's a comfortableness, there's an ease. There isn't a real sort of sense of, this, it's not like you feel like you're walking on, an edge of a cliff, right? You feel relaxed and like, oh, this could be fun. You don't feel like there's a 40% chance I might fall off this cliff.
Yeah.
So I think that,
I went hiking,
right.
Which is not like me, but I went hiking a few years ago with my son and this, little scout group and thing that he was a part of. And we went here in Utah where I live, we went down to Zion's National Park, and they have this well-known thing called Angel's Landing, where you get up to a certain point and you just have to hike with this cable, and there's a very small trail and you get up thousands of feet in the air, and it's kind of an accomplishment. They have had people perish on that hike before, and they have the statistics somewhere available. And it's like, out of the millions of people who go up there every year, the last time was a long time ago, and all those things that help people feel better about doing it. If they had a sign there that said 4 out of 10 of the people that go up here are going to fall off, I don't think that it would be as popular of an attraction.
So parents and friends and other people need to scare each other, and because it's that dangerous, not because you want to be a pain, but because you want your friends and your family and the people you care about and our society in general to stay intact and stay well. I'll hear about it. You hear about it some, but when I start to see the statistics on 100,000 people overdosing last year, that it's unbelievable. So yeah, and the access and because of social media, I think information and accessibility is happening at earlier and earlier ages.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about the idea of being scared, being the right level of scared, I kind of wonder, because my whole life, I know that I've always heard people talk about drug use and drug abuse in that terminology, life or death, life or death, life or death. If you use drugs, you'll die. If you use drugs, you'll die. It'll ruin your life. It'll ruin your life, that kind of thing. I think because people have casual experiences with intoxicants all the time, you kind of get on the other side, there's people that are like, oh no, you're just a narc and it's fun and it enhances your creativity, or it enhances your, it just makes life so much better on the other extreme. Even those of us that are in the treatment world, I think we look at it and we say, well, we'll try to be honest and try to be realistic about this and say many people have casual encounters with intoxication, and it never messes up their life, and they don't die from it, and they don't have serious health problems from it. Now that there is this crisis, I worry that people are used to hearing like, oh, take a drug, you'll die right away. And it's like, well, actually, now, that's more true than it's ever been, but people maybe don't listen to it as much because it's like, oh, they've been saying that. I've always been saying that.
If you're talking to a friend who says, I've been taking it for a year, I'm fine, it's fine, it's good, you'll feel this, you'll feel that. Who are you going to believe, right? Your friend's there, he's doing fine. There is a difference between if someone's getting opioids from a pharmacy, if they're really pharmaceutical grade medications, that's different than it is if you're buying off the street. And you don't know half the time. I know people who've thought they were getting medications from pharmacies that were not. And it had fentanyl and they were, when they found out they were, it's like, oh my gosh, I could have, or I did overdose and they brought me back and then I found that out. And so it's scarier because of that. And that didn't used to be the case to the degree it is now. It like you're saying, it's I think I've used this metaphor before, but like if you tell everybody there's a monster in the forest, over there, everybody's head turns towards the forest and starts wondering how close they can get to the forest. And then they want to go in the forest and then they want to see the monster. So it's like in scaring people, you also bring their attention to it to some degree. But this is so any rate, it's how do you scare people? You make them realize that you could take one pill and it could be your last. And so if you're going to do something, if you want to mess around with something, there are, kids are going to experiment. The idea that they're not is just, I think, naive. Some won't, but many, many will. Yeah. So the question then is, how do you do it in a way that's not really dangerous?
When fentanyl is laced into so many drugs. And I had heard the same thing you did. Just recently, I heard someone talking about marijuana or some dealers that are actually using those kinds of things to where someone may have every reason to think they're not going to be exposed to the fentanyl, and they are. Seems to be pretty important with all the overdose potential is the availability of naltrexone. And there are some states that are very regulated in it, and there's been some appeal to the administration to make it not just prescription only, to where people can have access to naltrexone and have it in the schools. I was talking to a neighbor of mine who's a librarian, actually in a library that's in a urban city area, and they actually keep an overdose box for people who go into overdose if they are using, say, in the library bathrooms or something, and they've had to use that at times for people who are having overdose symptoms that might not last until the ambulance gets there.
Right. So they use Narcan, which is basically, a fast way. I believe it's naltrexone, right? So they yes. Get an antagonist on board immediately.
I'm curious your thoughts though about what are some of the things that hold people back from wanting to, I don't know, take those precautions? Are people hesitant to say, oh, I want that to be in my kid's school because I know my kid would never do it, so I don't think about it? Or is it just denial?
I think in a way, it's too awful for parents to think about at times. And they also don't want to think that their kids could get involved in it. It's kind of scary, and it's not an easy thing to. There's some balance there, and it depends who you are as people. It's very personal, because I think you have to know kind of your kids and what's and how they're wired and what they're going to get exposed to. From my perspective, you want to keep an open dialogue, okay? And if they are going to experiment with alcohol at some point, or marijuana or other things, and which most people do. Okay. I think most kids do, not all kids, but a lot of kids do. You just want to make sure that there's an open dialogue, a lot of safety in terms of talking about it, so that you can really, hone in on what the dangers are and then educate them. But I think the main thing to be careful of these days is pills, of all sorts, because you don't know what's in them.
One of the things that I think is the most useful feedback I've ever gotten about having an open dialogue with your kids is making sure that when you do talk to them, how are you talking to them about things that aren't drugs, sex, and all the kinds of behavioral things that you might be worried about. When you're talking to your kids about normal things or about homework or any of those kinds of things, are you freaking out at them if they say something you don't like? Are you listening to them? Are you engaging in a dialogue? When they have questions about things, or they have opinions about things, are you belittling them, or are you actually taking what they say seriously? There's a lot of elements to how we talk about things that aren't that important, that are the smaller subjects. And I think that's going to go into whether or not our kids are likely to say, hey, I'm thinking about trying opiates, because if you yelled at me about me having a weird opinion about something, or if you, yelled and screamed when I brought home a certain kind of report card, I'm certainly not going to tell you that the other night I took a pill and I felt really funny, but I might want to do it again.
Well, I think that's it. Like, and one of the things I say to people is, and I put it just like this, I say, listen, I don't give a damn about the chemicals. I care about you. I want you to be okay. So just talk to me about it, right? Just tell me what's going on and so forth, and we'll figure it out. And so just to open it up and remove it from, it's the same with, whether you get an A or a D, I don't really care about the A or D. I do care about your development in your life and how you're, and how things, right, and what's going on. And so the subject's bigger. It's about really, the progression and the development of a person. And that includes how you talk to each other, how you think about things together, how they, internalize, because the better they feel about themselves, the more valuable they feel, the chances are they'll make better decisions, I think. So what you're pointing out, I think, is critical. Is there a certain tone that when you're talking with your kids and so forth that you have found effective?
As I try to have the same message that you do a lot of time, which is like, look, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. If there's something wrong, we'll figure it out. Let's just not, let's not get into where you have to hide something from me because you think I'll be mad. But then when I'm using those words, it has to be backed up by whether or not I got mad over something stupid the day before, right? To me, that's the biggest thing that I try, because it is sort of hard as a parent. I'm one of those parents. I tend to get more frustrated about stupid things like the trash can not getting taken out or something like that than I am to get upset about grades. I feel like and so that's different. Like I might say, oh man, this trash can is, over full. Why didn't someone just take it out? And in that case, I have to watch that I'm not freaking out about little stupid things, because then how are you going to talk to me about something serious? One of the things that I think is a struggle in talking to my kids is actually that they're good, smart kids. Now that's funny because there's so many advantages to having a kid who's a good kid and a smart kid. But it's also hard to talk to them because they really don't want to disappoint you oftentimes if they're a good kid, and will be really hesitant to tell you, yeah, I'm getting into a little bit of trouble with my grades, for example. I've gotten overwhelmed. I'm taking too many classes. They'll usually just try to fix it and then tell you later, or hope you didn't notice and their grades took a dive for a while. They'll just say, I'll just get ahead of it later and it'll be fine. And you're busy. And now you throw on top of that, if they're an emotionally sensitive kid, and I would say, I know that we stay away from generalities on this podcast, but I do find that those that are emotionally sensitive oftentimes are a little more at risk to get into addiction in the first place.
I think there's a lot of factors, and that can be one. But, how a person is put together, and people are put together very differently in terms of their sensitivity levels, their interests, how their nervous system is wired and what they respond to. And I think you have to know, if we're speaking about parents, you got to know your kid, and you have to know, like, there are some kids you can, will come to you if there's an issue. So other kids you'll never hear from if there's an issue, and you have to pay attention. You got to kind of check in. So above all else, you have to be attuned to who your kid is and how they operate and what the dynamics are. I mean, attunement is the thing, right? You stay attuned, right? You stay close, you stay attuned, and we all miss things and we all, but if it's good enough, I think it's your best bet. But the other thing is the time. The amount of time you spend with someone will dictate a lot. So it's, and also I know that the more time I spend talking with someone or with someone, the more things that move from the background to the foreground. The first inclination isn't going to be to want to tell you certain things, especially if they're hard things or hard discussions, or they feel embarrassed or worried about your response or something like that. But the more time you're together, the better the chance those things that are in the background may come to the foreground. And plus you also just, the rapport and everything gets stronger. So I think time's critical.
Sometimes social media can actually give the illusion of safety because I don't have to go to a sketchy neighborhood to find something. I can find it online. And so it feels like I'm a lot safer. But in reality, the secrecy of it going up is actually proportionately more dangerous nowadays.
And if you're taking a pill, you don't really know what you're putting in your body. Unless you got it from a doctor in a pharmacy and it's been prescribed, you don't know what you're putting in your body. And you're not, it's unclear what it could be. I just think that's the thing that everybody has to understand. And because there is so much, anonymity and the world is now so connected. And in some ways it's good, in some ways it's not good at all. You have to make sure that your kids and friends and everybody's aware of it. I've seen so much of the losses in people and lives and so forth. If you're going to make a mistake in going too far and scaring them. Better they're a little more scared than a little too comfortable. You can help that by also helping them feel comfortable with you. And just reminding them that it's not the chemicals you're worried about, it's them, right? But the chemicals, right, are that dangerous. So it's like walking around a cliff that our instincts don't kick in. Something looks benign and safe, but it's not.
And that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to myself. I'm Dwight Hurst and David Livingston as we've been able to have this conversation. We'd like you to get involved in the conversation. You can follow us on Twitter @opiates for the account for the Waismann Detox and Opioid Treatment Specialists. Please participate in our hashtag #StopTheSilence, to make sure that we are spreading awareness and sharing the word about the fentanyl crisis and of how out of hand and how scary that's becoming. Our messages on Twitter are open, and you can also email us at info@opiates.com to learn more or to share questions that you would like to see us address on this show. This show is produced by Pop Collar Productions, and our music is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. Remember, until we meet again, keep asking questions. If you ask questions, you can find answers. And wherever you find answers, you can find hope. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you again soon.